Chapter 5 of The Gray Phantom by Herman Landon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. The Gray Phantom by Herman Landon. Chapter 5 Perplexities. Minutes passed, each dragging a train of monstrous fancies before Helen's mental vision. The tip of her finger shut out all sounds from her ears, but the laughter still dinned and echoed in her imagination. It reminded her of the haunting strains of glee that had come from Virginia Darrow's dying lips. Somehow this laughter was different, but the difference was so subtle that she could but vaguely sense it. It was loud and delirious, in contrast to the gentle, dirge-like notes that had characterized the other. She could stand the suspense no longer. Sped on by fear, she ran in the direction where she thought the door was. She brought up against a stairway instead. A noise caused her to lift her head. Down the stairs, lurching and sliding, came a woman. Her hair was wildly tousled and her clothing in disorder, and peal after peal of harsh laughter cut through the silence as she scurried down the steps. Then she saw Helen, and she stopped as abruptly as if she had dashed in against a material barrier. Clutching the railing with one hand, she wagged drunkenly from side to side. Her face was ashen, but her skin was clear and smooth as a young girl's. The eyes, unnaturally wide and bright, stared down at Helen with fierce intensity. She had ceased laughing, but the lips were still agape, as if suddenly frozen into rigidity. Helen forgot her fears as she saw the strange look on the woman's face. She wondered whether it meant madness, terror, or intoxication. It seemed to be neither, but rather a blending of all three. Slowly, with the outspread fingers of one hand pressing against her breast, the woman came down the remaining steps. Her great eyes were still fixed on Helen, but the mad flame in the depths was gradually yielding to a look of sanity. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. Her voice was dry, and she spoke with little hissing sounds, as if each word were exhausting her breath. Helen winced as the woman clutched her arm. Streaks of gray in the tumbled masses of her black hair clashed sharply with her youthfully rounded face, and Helen guessed that the contrast had been brought about by some terrifying experience. "Do you know where you are?" the woman went on, tightening her grip on Helen's arm. "This is Azure Crest, isn't it?" Helen's words voiced an indefinite doubt that had been stirring faintly in the back of her mind since she saw the face at the window. "I came here to see to see Mr. Venardi." "Azure Crest?" The woman's mind seemed to be slowly struggling out of a daze. "Yes, that's what they call the place. But there is no Mr. Venardi here. You have been deceived, just as I was. Those monsters, do you know what will happen to you if you remain here?" Helen shrugged, as if to fight off a stupor that seemed to be gradually enfolding body and mind. "They'll inject the fever into your veins," the woman told her, without waiting for an answer. "The fever that always kills. Sometimes it kills quickly, but most of the time very slowly, just as it is killing me. You will not feel much pain. You will laugh and sing and dream strange dreams. Those are always the symptoms. At first, before the fever reaches the last stage, you will laugh loud and hilariously, like this." She threw back her head, and then came an outburst of screaming laughter that made Helen shudder. "That's how it sounds at first, but later, when the fever has burned out your strength and destroyed your reason, the laughter will be low and soft and lilting. Then it sounds like this." She gave a series of low, tinkling sounds that were like a requiem set to laughter. Helen shivered. Just so had Virginia Darrow gone laughing to her death. The coincidence seemed rather weird. The stark realism of the imitation gripped her. And yet she wondered whether she were dreaming or whether the woman beside her were reveling in the fancies of a maniac. The other stiffened suddenly. She seemed to recall something which her encounter with Helen had temporarily blotted from her mind. Placing 2 fingers across her lips, she cast a swift glance up the stairs. For a brief space she stood tense, listening. "The woman who watches me went to sleep, and I stole away from her," she whispered. "We must try to get out before they begin looking for me. You must come too. It won't do for you to remain a moment longer. Shh." Silent as a wraith, she stole down the hall. Helen, scarcely knowing what she was doing, followed dazedly. She did not know what to think, but there was an undertow of vague dread in her jumbled thoughts and emotions. What she had just heard sounded wildly fantastical, like the raving of a deranged mind. Yet she had a feeling that something was dreadfully wrong. The strange laughter and the face at the window appeared to give a background of reality to what the woman had said. They seemed to suggest, too, that there was a connecting link between Azure Crest and the tragedy in the Thelma Theater. It was this circumstance, bewildering and almost unbelievable, that clogged the functioning of Helen's mind and rendered her willing to be led along by her guide. The door was unlocked and they passed unhindered into the open. In a dull and indifferent fashion, Helen thought it strange that the woman's loud laughter had not already betrayed them, but then it occurred to her that perhaps such outbursts were common at Azure Crest. After what she had already seen and heard, nothing would have surprised her greatly. She wondered how her companion meant to overcome the obstacles of the locked gate and the high picket fence. Perhaps, in her beclouded state of mind and eagerness to escape, she was not even giving them a thought. Or perhaps— Her guide stopped so abruptly that Helen, who had been following close behind, nearly ran into her. Out of the mist and shadows came a low, rumbling growl. A huge black shape bounded toward them. "The dog!" exclaimed the other. "I forgot! Oh!" The beast, rearing on hind legs, sprang at her throat and felled her. She lay prone on the ground, the dog crouching over her with jaws slavering and forefeet pawing her body. Helen stood motionless in her tracks. The dog's eyes and teeth gleamed menacingly in the moonlight, and she knew that the slightest move would precipitate an attack upon her. Her mind, clearing rapidly under the stress of danger, was seeking a way out of the predicament when hurried footsteps came down the walk. "Caesar!" called a gruff voice. The dog let go its hold as a man came running toward them. He stopped and gathered the fallen woman in his arms, and Helen recognized the individual who had met her at the gate on her arrival. With scarcely a glance in her direction, he turned and walked toward the house with his burden. Helen, feeling the gleaming eyes of the beast on her face, dared not move. As she stood wondering what to do, a shadow fell across the graveled walk, and a second man came toward her. "Back to your kennel, Caesar," he commanded, and the dog obediently slunk away. "Excellent watchdog, but a bit ferocious when he is kept on half rations. Won't you come inside, Hardwick? Hawks told me about you. I am Mr. Slade. Sorry to have kept you waiting." His manner and appearance were pleasant enough, yet Helen felt an impulse to run. The things she had seen and heard since coming to Azure Crest were highly mystifying, and they had left a number of questions and suspicions in her mind. She glanced quickly toward the picket fence, then in the direction whence Caesar had disappeared. Something told her that a whistle would set the dog snapping and snarling at her heels if she should try to break away. She decided that her hope lay in diplomacy rather than flight. As if he had read her thoughts, Slade touched her arm and escorted her to the house. She sensed that a trying ordeal was ahead of her, and she was already steeling her nerves for it. She had faced danger many times, and her buoyant nature always responded to the demands of a crisis with a quickening of wits and rising courage. "I trust Miss Neville didn't annoy you," murmured Slade apologetically as he opened the door and conducted her down the hall. "A very difficult case of paranoia. She gets quite violent at times, and she is subject to all sorts of hallucinations. Tonight she broke away from her nurse, and would no doubt have attempted to scale the fence, if Caesar hadn't interrupted her." Helen walked beside him in silence. She had already wondered whether Miss Neville could be quite sane. Oddly enough, Slade's words almost convinced her that the woman was of sound mind, though perhaps she was suffering from the effects of illness and shock. Helen had conceived an immediate and instinctive distrust of Slade, despite his smooth-flowing speech and suave manners. He ushered her into the same room she had left so hurriedly upon hearing the laughter, and placed a chair for her. A look at his face in the electric light gave edge to her misgivings, but at first she could not tell what there was about him that repelled her. According to all standards, he should have attracted her and inspired confidence in her. His personality contained that blend of strength and gentleness which she had liked in men ever since her days of inconsequential hero worship. He had the strong jaw and high forehead that often go with aggressiveness and mental keenness, and he carried his tall figure with the easy grace of a man of the world. His presence would have been quite magnetic if only— But Helen could not finish the thought. There was an unnameable something about him that eluded her mental grasp. "Quite a sad case, that of Miss Neville," he continued. "She was once a very brilliant woman, but her genius was consumed by its own fire, so to speak. I might as well tell you that she is my half-sister. For her own good, and to avoid unpleasant notoriety, I am keeping her here under the care of a physician. Her friends believe that she is traveling abroad, and so far I have succeeded in keeping the true state of affairs secret. There is a possibility, though a very remote one, that she will recover." Helen made no comment. Though his eyes were lowered seemingly on the floor, she felt he was watching her and wondering whether she believed him. She thought it strange that he should have taken her into his confidence in regard to matters which one usually does not divulge to strangers. There were a number of questions on the tip of her tongue, but she thought it better to hold them back. "I suppose," Slade went on in melancholy tones, "that she told you the usual story of mistreatment and persecution?" "She seemed very excited." Helen weighed her words with care. "I don't remember all she told me, but she said something of a fever that was gradually killing her, and she seemed very anxious to get away from this place." "Yes, the fever is one of her hallucinations. She imagines that she is suffering from a strange disease. And not only that, but she thinks everybody around her afflicted with the same mysterious malady. The idea is firmly rooted in her mind that the disease has been deliberately communicated to her by enemies. No doubt she told you of a queer kind of laughter that is supposed to be one of the symptoms of the strange ailment." "She not only mentioned it, but she gave me a demonstration. It sounded a bit creepy." "I can readily believe it. It must have been very unpleasant for you. I take it that she told you the story convincingly enough to make an impression on you, or you would not have started to run away with her." He smiled as he spoke, and all at once Helen saw the reason for her instinctive dislike of him. The smile was of the lips only. There was no responsive gleam in his eyes. And his eyes, she now perceived, were hard and dispassionate as bits of porcelain. "She frightened me, and I didn't know what to think," she guardedly admitted. "I suppose I followed her on the impulse of the moment. I do most things on impulse, you see." "That's the privilege of youth." He laughed, but his eyes were as glossy and expressionless as fish scales, and seemed to veto his vocal merriment. "Luckily you wouldn't have got further than the gate, even if Caesar hadn't intervened. It would be very embarrassing if Miss Neville should escape from us some night, and expose her condition to the world. There is slight danger of that, though. I have taken all necessary precautions. However, your meeting Miss Neville here, and noticing the state she is in, makes the situation rather awkward. I should dislike to have the matter get into the newspapers. I have been frank with you, hoping you would see the delicacy of the situation from my point of view." "I never gossip about people's misfortunes," declared Helen with emphasis. "Thank you. I know I can depend on you, Miss Hardwick. I hope Caesar didn't frighten you. By the way," and suddenly he seemed to remember something, "my secretary told me you were inquiring for Mr. Vernardi." Helen started slightly. For an hour she had been wondering why she had seen nothing of the gray phantom, and why her request to see him had been met with evasions and cross-questioning. Slade regarded her with polite curiosity. "I have seen your name in the newspapers, Miss Hardwick. You wrote the play that Vincent Starr produced at his theater. Only a little while ago I was reading of the peculiar tragedy that interrupted the first performance last night. I wonder whether your visit here has anything to do with that occurrence." It was a strange question, Helen thought. I would rather talk over my errand with Mr. Vernardi in person," she stammered. She was chilled and confused by his steady gaze. "Isn't he here?" Slade's lips twitched. "You know, of course, that Mr. Vernardi is the genial rascal who used to be known as the Gray Phantom." "You needn't answer. I see that you do. It strikes me as rather odd that a young lady of your evident refinement and culture should be associated with a man of that type. Pardon my impertinence. The fact of the matter is that Mr. Vernardi is not here. He left Azure Crest some time ago." "What?" Helen half rose from the chair. With a great exertion of will power she steadied herself. "Mr. Vernardi not here? Then where is he?" "That I don't know. I purchased Azure Crest from him through a broker. I never had any dealings with the man himself. In fact, at the time I bought the place, I didn't know that it had been occupied by the Gray Phantom. You see, I had been looking for a secluded spot, where Miss Neville could live quietly and without fear of unwelcome intrusions. Azure Crest seemed to answer the requirements, and so I bought it." Helen stared at him, unable to disguise her bewilderment. Slade's statement amazed and shocked her. She had not been in correspondence with the Gray Phantom, but at their last meeting he had told her to communicate with him at Azure Crest if she should ever need him. She thought it strange that he had not sent her word of his removal. Slade was sauntering leisurely back and forth across the floor. Now and then, as he looked at her, his eyes gave her a chill. She made a strong effort to gather her thoughts and master her feelings. Something, she did not know just what, told her that the occasion demanded a cool head and steady nerves. A motor horn sounded in the distance. Evidently a car was winding its way up the hill. The thought gave her a vague sense of comfort. She sat up straight. "I told the man who met me at the gate that I wished to see Mr. Venardi," she remarked. "Later I told Hawks the same thing. Neither one intimated that Mr. Venardi was no longer here. I was asked a lot of useless questions and asked to wait. Then—" "My dear Miss Hardwick," smoothly interrupted Slade, "you must understand that the circumstances under which my half-sister and myself are living here make it necessary for me to be very cautious with regard to visitors. My servants have orders to subject all callers to careful inspection and cross-examination. For instance, how do I know that you are not a newspaper reporter looking for a sensation?" Helen smiled. The suggestion seemed so absurd. Once more the blare of a horn sounded in the distance. "And that reminds me," Slade went on in slightly altered tones, "that you have not yet explained your presence here. I asked you a moment ago whether it had anything to do with what happened at the Thelma Theater." "So you did." Helen's smile, though tantalizing, was the kind with which one masks an inner turbulence. "I am waiting for your answer." Slade seemed as suave and urbane as before, but his eye was a trifle frostier, and his tone carried a peremptory note. Helen glanced at the window. A glare like that of a motor car's headlight was approaching the house. "Your question is very peculiar," she replied with a haughtiness which she did not quite feel, "and I see no reason why I should answer it." "No?" Slade had ceased his pacing of the floor, and Helen wondered whether it was by design or accident that he had stopped with his back to the door. "Perhaps the question will seem less peculiar if I word it differently. What did you mean when you told Hawks that the business you wished to discuss with Venardi had to do with Mr. Shea?" Helen felt a tingle of suspense. There was a sneer on Slade's lips, and his frigid eyes filled her with a vague dread. She tried to parry the question with banter, but the words would not come. She twisted in her chair, and suddenly, as the door behind Slade's back came open, her gaze grew rigid and a look of consternation filled her eyes. She gripped the arms of her chair and very slowly raised herself to her feet, all the while staring intently at the figure whose arrival had been heralded a few minutes ago by the headlight's glare. The newcomer seemed startled at first, then he smiled. Slade stepped aside and bowed deferentially to the man in the doorway. Then he noticed Helen's transfigured face. "You two seem to have met before," he remarked. Helen advanced a step. She drew a long, trembling breath. A staggering realization flashed through her mind as she gazed rigidly into the newcomer's smiling face. It was the same realization that had come to her with such unnerving force in the Thelma Theater. It had grown hazy and vague during the intervening hours, and the quick succession of events had left her wondering. Now she knew that her first intuitive suspicion had been correct. Her mind seemed to reel and spin. She hardly knew that her lips were moving, but her voice, hoarse and scarcely audible, was uttering a name: "Mr. Shea!" End of chapter 5. Recording by Roger Moline.